Yes, hello again. Welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV and to a super sunny Helsington Classic Scramble. Well, hello everybody, welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, and as you can see we're out and about on our travels once again, and today we're here at Milnthorpe near Kendal to cover the 2025 Helsington Classic Scramble. Now, as you can see, we've been absolutely blessed with perfect weather for this weekend's event, so the Westmoreland Motor Club have certainly picked the right date this year to hold their scramble, because the whole of the UK is currently in the grip of a heat wave. So I think it's about 24 or 25 degrees as it stands today. I think it's only about 11 o'clock during the day, so it's to get a bit hotter as the afternoon progresses. So I think it's going to be the old caps, sunglasses, suntan lotion, and of course shorts that will be the order of the weekend. Now, as I said, the Westmoreland Motor Club have been putting on these kind of events in and around the Kendal area for more than 100 years. So when it comes to putting on one of these scramble events, then those guys certainly know what they're all about. And the sponsors for this year's 2025 Helsington Scramble will be again Bill Brown at Wolfsport, and of course the Coniston Brewery. So well done to those two sponsors who have actually been anchor men for many of the Westmoreland Motor Club's events in the last few years. So well done to them. Now, this track here at Helsington does have a good bit of history with it. I think the first race event was back in 1952, and then I think it was shut down in the early 1970s and then resurrected in 2022. And I think this is only about the third or the fourth time that this event's been run at this hallowed ground. So there were some very big stars that used to race at this classic Helsington racetrack. So anyway, this is a Saturday setup day, so there are a few bikes already in the paddock. We are expecting quite a few more Saturday night, and what we're going to do is take a short walk around the paddock and see if we can catch a few bikes on the Saturday afternoon. Then we'll do exactly the same thing tomorrow morning before we get down to all the racing. So for the time being, let's make our way back to the paddock and let's see what we can see. But just before we take a look at some of the bikes from Helsington, a brief history on this iconic racetrack that down the years has certainly had some real history surrounding it, and some of the best British off-road racers of their day had at one time or another taking part in scrambles at this venue. Anyhow, according to the Westmoreland Club's website, Helsington held its first ever scramble back in 1952 and was later, I think, closed down in the early 1970s, and I think it was something to do with a new bypass road that was being built right next to the track. But thankfully it was then resurrected by the Westmoreland Motor Club in 2022, and it's now being run annually since then. But back in its heyday, the cream of British scrambling did turn up here to race at Helsington, and names including the great Sammy Miller and Andy Roberton and Norman Barrow, Sid Lampkin, Brian Wade were only just a few that were listed, but basically all of the top stars of their time did take part at this Helsington racetrack at one point in their racing careers. Now, one of the big features of Helsington in the early 1960s was that it had a small stream that used to run across the centre of the track, where riders would either try to ride through it or maybe attempt to jump it altogether. And in these pictures that were kindly supplied by the Margaret Duff collection, you can see that particular obstacle in these very rare pictures. And so you can see in these nice archive pictures from the Margaret Duff collection that the track layout may have changed since the 1960s, but the ground and the landscape surrounding it are pretty much the same. And these old historic photographs certainly give you a little window into just what it was like to take part in those old school scramble events at this iconic Helsington racetrack. So as you can imagine, we've got 73 years of history involved in this particular racetrack here at Helsington, and it's great to have it back on our racing calendar once again. Anyhow, let's get back to business and take our first look at a few of the bikes I came across on the Saturday, which was of course prior to race day. So this was the very first bike that I spied, which as you can see is a quite nice 1981 RM125 Suzuki, which on the face of it did look like an original little bike, and this machine here was also being offered up for sale on the day. So if you're maybe in the market for a nice water-cooled Suzuki 125, then this might be something that may fit the bill. Now, you're probably already aware that these 1981 RM125s were Suzuki's first ever liquid-cooled motocrosser, because their previous bikes in 1980 were the last of the air-cooled Suzuki engine. But of course it was a double whammy for Suzuki in 1981, because it was then that they also switched from the old twin shocks to this single rear shock with that superb full floater swing arm setup. And this little belter of a 125 engine was also a big hit with many of the riders in 1981, because this little motor here just simply thrived on revs, and it seemed that the more you revved it, the more it seemed to like it. And as I remember, it had a 6-speed gearbox, so they had plenty cogs inside this engine to keep your feet dancing up and down on its transmission. So to fuel our little RM125, it was a 32mm Mikuni carburetor, and with regards the airbox and filter, you had 2 filters on this bike, which was basically a kind of flat filter that was fitted onto both of the outsides of the plastic airbox. But the more you look around this little Suzuki, the more that you're convinced that it is indeed a genuine little bike, and it doesn't appear to have been abused down the years, because even some of the parts, like this exhaust expansion chamber and some of the plastics on this bike, are in remarkable condition considering this bike's age. Now, also for 81, it was a single rear shock, and of course Suzuki's magical full floater swing arm setup here at the back. And that shock had a remote gas and oil filled reservoir that was tucked up nice and neat underneath this fuel tank, where hopefully the on-rushing air that would go past the bike would play its part in keeping it cool. But it was quite a unique setup even for 81. Now, in terms of the 125's engine's cooling system, as far as I remember, we had a small vertical radiator on both sides of the bike's front down tube, and those were covered over in an alloy grille just to try and help keep stones and other flying debris from damaging its precious cooling system. Although looking around this little 125 Screamer, it certainly has a look of a bike that's been lying around for quite some time, although, as I said, it appears to not have any pattern or even replacement parts bolted onto it. So in that respect, it's quite an honest looking second-hand racer for somebody, but I suspect that it wouldn't be eligible to race in something like the twin-shock air-cooled Cup, because naturally it has that monoshock suspension and that liquid-cooled motor. And so if you're maybe in the market for an old-school liquid-cooled motocrosser, then maybe this is something that you might be interested in, because as I see it, it certainly looks like a very genuine old 1980s race bike. And although I don't know the rider or his name, but these were certainly the contact details that he left with the bike. So I dare say if you give him a ring, I'm sure he'll fill you in on the full story of this quite nice 1981 RM125 Suzuki. Now, probably the award for the best painted trailer in the paddock at Helsington, if there was, of course, such an award, would more than likely have gone to Andy Barnes for his quite unique 490 micro graphics that were on both sides of his trailer, which, as you'd expect, also had a couple of quite fine examples of the 81 490s inside. Now, to be fair, there weren't really many bikes actually out on display on the Saturday afternoon, because most riders tend not to take their bikes out of their transporters until race day, just in case of sticky-fingered lowlifes that want to cart off your pride and joy. But nevertheless, Andy Hinchcliffe did have a couple of his bikes out in the sunshine, and this one here is Andy's superb Faber BSA. So anyhow, I've always thought that Andy was a twin-shock Honda man, because I do know that he races a 125 and 250 CR Hondas, and of course occasionally his CZ as well, but this is the first time I've seen him with an old British classic in his bike collection, and if he goes as well on this old Beezer as he does on his other two Hondas, then we're certainly in for a wee treat come Sunday race day. Anyhow, from what I actually gathered on the day, this bike here has a Faber frame, which, as I see it, are updated versions of the old BSA Works Victor chassis that, of course, were the brainchild of Howard Fox and Miles Webb, who are the original creators of these superb chassis, which have been told, I think, over 120 of these units have now been sold and are all hand built and made to order, so you can understand why these frames are exclusive. So because Andy's Faber BSA is more or less a kind of modern interpretation of one of these old classics, it does have a few updated parts on it to make the bike behave a little better on the track, and this B44 four-stroke engine also had some 21st century tweaks with a new and improved cartridge type oil filtration system, which is a lot more efficient than the old gauze type filter that they used to have inside the chassis. And I expect that inside these casings there'll also be other 21st century upgrades on the engine's internals, although I was never given the full SP and specs from Andy on the day because he was too busy swanning around getting his tan in order, and I can't really blame him because it was absolutely cooking under that sun on the Saturday. So here at the front end we've got a nice pair of billet alloy triple clamps to secure those front forks, which did look to me like these could be a pair of Serianis, but they did have Bombardier etched into the alloy bottoms, which are not a name that I'm familiar with in motorcycle forks terms, but they could have had Maxton internals as well if we go by that sticker on each fork leg. But then again, the Bombardier I do know are connected to the old Can-Am bike, so who knows, maybe these forks here are made by Bombardier in Canada, and who knows, the forks are maybe off one of their old Can-Am motocrossers. And here at the back end of Andy's Faber BSA, it's once more a pair of Maxton Classic shocks, and these will certainly be a lot better than anything that BSA bolted onto the back of this bike way back in the 1960s. And on this side of the casings of the motor, we've got more modifications with these parts of the casings removed, which again I think was all done as part of the upgrade on the new engine oil filtration system. And it looks like it might be an Italian Dell'Orto carburetor that Andy's using to feed the fuel into that BSA 4-stroke engine. Now once again, and just like many of the other original Victor frames from back in the day, these Faber chassis also have the motor's engine oil stored inside the frame, and you can just see the filler plug there just at the front of the bike's alloy fuel tank. But again, the bike's chrome plated swing arm is yet another Faber manufactured product, which I suspect is all part of your frame kit when you order one from the suppliers. And as we make our way along to the business end of the engine's exhaust, and this is where you're going to hear that nice dulcet BSA tone from that 4-stroke engine when Andy's giving it the message out there on the track. So I suspect that Andy's going to be a very busy man this weekend, because the way I see it, he'll be racing 3 different bikes in 3 different classes, and personally I don't know how he actually does it, because I know when I raced my old Myco in my 40s in just one class, I just couldn't wait to see that checkered flag. But certainly look out for Mr. Hinchcliffe on this BSA when we get around to posting all the racing highlights from this Helsington event. So this bike here was another one of Andy Hinchcliffe's machines, which is his 1981 250 CR Red Rocket that, although isn't a fully original example from that year, it's still another good looking interpretation of what was without doubt an iconic bike from the early 1980s. But there are very few of these red rockets going around now that still have all of their stock original parts on them these days, and it's very common to fit things like alloy swing arms and different forks and rear suspensions and other exotic upgrades to these red rockets, because there's certainly a thriving market for new old stock and remanufactured parts for these bikes. So it's quite easy to customize your own individual machine, which is one reason that makes these CR250s such a good choice if you want to get into twin shock or classic racing. But as I said, I'm pretty sure that this is an 81 Red Rocket because it has this twin spar down-tube frame here at the front and the centre port exhaust engine as well, which I'm pretty sure was another feature on the 81 engine because, as I recall, the 1980 motor still had the side port exhaust and, of course, the big single spar down-tube front part of the frame. But no question at all, this two-stroke engine, even for 1981, was just simply magical, and it was one of the reasons that riders were giving up their European Maicos and Bultacos and Montesas so that they could get their hands on this latest tech from Japan. And here at the back end, we've got some nice quality Swedish Öhlins here at the rear of our Honda Twin Shocker. These again will be far superior to anything that Honda bolted onto this bike when it left the factory almost 44 years ago. But then again, the ones that Honda fixed to the bike, I suppose, were simply the technology of the early 1980s. Still, it's good to see that Andy's kept the faith and stayed true to the bike's original steel swing arm because, as I said, it's quite a common swap for riders to remove these original steel swing arms in favour of a much shinier and lighter alloy part. But for me personally, I've never ever been a fan of alloy swing arms because although they're much lighter and maybe look better, I don't think that those alloy swing arms can take the same kind of punishment of the bike's original steel item. Nevertheless, you should have absolutely no problems whatsoever seeing Andy's Faber BSA and his 250 Red Rocket when it comes to posting all of the racing highlights because Andy's usually up there at the sharp end of the racing pack. So in that respect, he's quite easy to spot. But a couple of nice classics there. That's Andy Hinchcliffe's British Faber Thumper, and of course his light and nimble and very quick 250 Honda Red Rocket. So anyhow, let's conclude our Saturday's Paddock walkabout and continue the Hinchcliffe motorcycle show with a look at another Hinchy classic, and this time round it's Stephen Hinchcliffe's 1974 Honda CR250 Elsenor, which again you can see is another quite nice example of one of Honda's first ever real purpose built motocross race bikes, because many of Honda's motocross bikes that had gone before were really just modified road bikes with knobbly tyres fitted. So this was the bike that put Honda on the world motocross map in the early 1970s. Now, even in 1974, this Honda 250 two-stroker was an absolute cracking engine, and it was well suited to this lightweight chassis that it was sitting in, although that cylinder head there is of course not the bike's original. The one fitted here on Stephen's bike is one of those D&G performance jobs that are said to improve on the original Honda cylinder head design, but whether it actually does what it says on the tin, I don't know, because I've never had the opportunity to speak to anybody that's made this upgrade. But you can see it's a cylinder head that maybe fits more than one kind of model, and it does look a little bit out of place here, sitting on top of this Elsenor's 250 cylinder. But that exhaust expansion chamber is yet another upgrade to the original design, because these low-slung LC pipes did certainly suffer a fair bit of damage on the track, so it's not surprising to see a pattern replacement that's been fitted in its place. And there's certainly some evidence that this pipe's had a few running repairs already, judging by the very high quality welding that's been done on this part of the pipe. So you can see that the main body of the expansion chamber is a replacement, and this alloy tailpipe here is different from the 74 original as well, because I'm pretty sure in that year it would have been a small kind of mild steel tailpipe that would have been fitted here at the back of the machine. And you may remember me talking about replacement swing arms on these old classics. It is quite rare to find a 74 Elsenor these days that it still has its original tubular steel swing arm still fitted in place. And these alloy replacements, as I said, are quite a common swap on these Elsenor models. And although I mentioned I'm not a fan of these lighter alloy ones, I must say that this part here does look quite strong and very well made. But moving on to the front of our Elsenor, the front forks certainly look like they are the real deal from 74, and for the time period I suppose these were quite surprisingly good suspension units for Honda's first production built motocrosser, and a few other little touches like that plastic or rubber CR mud flap extension was one of the trademarks of these 74 LCs when they first took to the tracks of not only the USA but many of the European venues as well. And here we have the immediately recognisable 74 alloy fuel tank with the traditional green stripe down the middle for the 74 models, because as I remember, I think it was the 75s that followed had the red stripe down the centre, but Stevens' tank is certainly showing some signs of being in the motocross wars with a few dings and dents, which is only what you'd expect on a 51-year-old dirt racer. But to keep the back end of Stevens' Elsenor in check, he's going for a pair of these Maxton classic shocks, which I'm told on quite good authority do work very well on these old school classic racers. And as in our previous Honda Red Rockets, these modern engineered suspension units will be far superior to the old Showa ones that Honda fitted to these bikes in 74. Now, the old LC's seat was another area that Stephen wanted to improve so as that he could keep his crown jewels all nice and safe when he hit those big massive bumps with the limited amount of travel he had here at his back end. That's the back end of the bike and not Stephen's particular back end, if you get my drift. So this seat here with its deep lush padding is an American spec upgrade, whereby I think you simply order all the parts in and then you put the seat together at your leisure. But as you can see, it does have quite a lot more padding and cushioning effect than the stock Honda Elsenor item. And finally, up here in the rider's pilot seat, all of those original LC controls from back in the day are long gone, which isn't surprising because most of these kind of controls are motocross consumables and are normally changed on a regular basis during the bike's lifetime. But we've got a pair of Nice rental bars there, and a pair of good quality Rycon levers, and of course an engine kill switch as well, just in case of any emergencies and Stephen needs to pull the plug and shut down the Elsenor's motor. But as I said, very few riders took the opportunity to take their bikes out of their transporters on the Saturday for the reasons that I explained earlier, and these few that we've just had a look at here were just some of the lucky ones who braved the 30-degree temperatures on the day, and they were lucky enough to have them featured here on CDB TV. But we've got quite a good variety to show you coming up in part 2, plus of course many more from the Helsington Bill Brown Classic Scramble. So hopefully you'll all return to my channel to see the next collection of old classics when we revisit Helsington 2025.